Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Julia. I'm the assistant director here. We are so happy to welcome Jane Healey here today to talk about her newest book, The Secret Stealers. And I would like to thank the Hanson Public Library Foundation for sponsoring this event. Jane?
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. This is so exciting. It's my first real live event since last summer. So I've been doing all online stuff. So it's really exciting, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to hear about my book. It's always awesome to do live events and meet readers and actually talk to people, because I've only been doing a lot of Zoom at this point, and I'm a little sick of that. So Secret Stealers is my third novel. My first one was The Saturday Evening Girls Club, and it was about a group of women from Boston's North End at the turn of the 20th century, and that came out in 2017. The Beantown Girls, it was my first World War II novel. That came out in 2019, and it's based on the true stories of the Red Cross Clubmobile girls who served coffee and donuts at the front lines of the war and ended up doing a lot more than that. And then The Secret Stealers came out about a year ago, and that is based on the true stories of the women of the Office of Strategic Services during World War II, and that was the precursor to the CIA. So today, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about the inspiration for The Secret Stealers and my research behind the story, and also give some historical context for like 1940s France and the French resistance and what was going on at the time that kind of helps frame the narrative. And then my inspiration for my main characters in the novel, which are all based on real people, but not necessarily directly, more like composites a lot of the time. So Beantown Girls, I was really fortunate, did really well. Washington Post bestseller, #1 on Kindle, and so my editors were looking for a new project from me, and I kind of keep a running file of ideas about like, what do I want to write about next? And it's really nice now because people actually send me articles and things, and I came across this article in the Washington Post, and it was about Stephanie Check Rader. She was, it was at the very end of World War II. She was an undercover spy in post-war Europe, but she wasn't an undercover spy for the British. Like, I'd heard of the SOE and the British SOE, but she was an American undercover spy with the OSS. So, and that was the first time I was like, I knew about the SOE, never really knew that there was any American women who were undercover. Yes.
Can you just tell us what SOE is?
Oh, Special Operations Executive for the British. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Sorry, I should have given that context. So I didn't know that there were American female spies, basically, and she was the first one I had ever heard of. So I was like, well, that might be something. I don't think there's been a lot of books written about the OSS and women of the OSS. And then I came across this article, and so this is Betty and Doris. The one that you can see is Doris, and they moved in next to each other, like almost next door to each other, in a retirement community outside of Washington, D.C., and they became best friends. And in the course of their friendship, they found out that they both worked for the OSS undercover during World War II, and one of them was stationed in Asia, and one of them was stationed in Italy. So they never met, and then they both went on to work for the CIA. And so when I read this article, I was fascinated because they had fascinating stories, and Betty McIntosh actually wrote, it's called Sisterhood of Spies, and it was like a memoir about various women in the OSS. Not necessarily all of them were undercover spies. Some of them worked in offices overseas, including Julia Child. So when I read her memoir, I'm like, okay, like there's enough there for a story. And in the course of my research, so this is Doris in her retirement, and this is Doris during World War II, which I thought was so amazing. Like, loved, like, and you know, she still got like sparkle in her eye, but yeah, I love that. So I want to talk a little bit contextually about like women in the shadows of World War II, which included the OSS, the SOE, which was the British spies, and the French resistance. This book, compared to my first two, incredible amount of research because it spanned a good portion of the war. It touched upon a lot of different subjects. So these are just some of the books, and I still have the little sticky tabs in them because I'm superstitious. It was much broader in scope. Lots of books, articles, and online resources. believe it or not, the OSS only declassified the personnel records of the people who were in the OSS in 2008. So that was available online. When I was figuring out my kind of narrative, it was clear that Paris was almost going to be like another character in the story. So right before the world shut down in October 2019, my husband and I took a trip, because he speaks French, which comes in handy when you're going on a research trip to Paris. So this was our first day with jet lag. And then I looked up, I found this guy online, Nigel, and he is a professor and historian, and he does these guided tours of Paris on various topics. And this one was specifically about the French resistance and the spaces that they used. And so we walked around the city with him for like 6 hours. And he answered all my questions and then told me some other stories that I didn't even know about. And he really, it was such a worthwhile trip, and he really helped me shape, never mind just like Paris, such a fun trip, like helped shape the narrative that became The Secret Stealers. So, like I said, I want to talk a little bit about contextually, who were these women, why were they working in the shadows, and because I kind of knew this from history, but I had to kind of ramp up again. So, occupied France in World War II. It was split in June 1940 between the occupied zone in the north, which of course had the whole coast, and the free zone in the south, and the capital was established in Vichy, France. The Vichy French regime from the very beginning collaborated with the Germans. They acted like that area was free, but they were always kind of collaborating from the start. And then by 1942, Germany had occupied all of France. So just to give some context. And then these next pictures are really interesting. Hitler only visited Paris once, but some of these pictures have become famous. This is Hitler shaking hands with the head of the Vichy French government, Marshal Pétain, shortly after the agreement. And so on June 13th, 1940, Parisians went to bed, and they woke up next morning to the sound of a German accented voice saying, curfew is imposed, and by that night, the Germans had occupied Paris, and the world was turned upside down in the city. This is another famous picture. And then these next photos show you kind of life in occupied Paris during the war, and they're actually a little controversial because it looks on the surface like, okay, there's some Nazis, people are going about their lives, they're playing, Nazi bands playing in the square. This picture's very famous and kind of chilling, across from the Tuileries Gardens. There was parades all the time. The Germans added signs on all the street corners, and a lot of the French would move the signs around so that they would like little subversive, yeah. So on the surface, looks like things are okay, and Parisians are going about their lives. Of course, the Germans were the only ones who had gas, who had petrol there was a lot of horse and buggies and bicycles for the French. But underneath the surface, from the beginning of the occupation, and then of course it got worse as it went on, things were getting darker. As you can see, Jews had to wear the yellow stars, and then slowly the Germans started taking other rights away. So they couldn't go to the movies or the theater. They couldn't go to the park. They couldn't sit on park benches. They couldn't walk across the Champs-Élysées. And then they weren't allowed to grocery shop during the day. They had to grocery shop when all the food was gone at night. And so on the surface, the Germans tried to paint, from a propagandist perspective in the beginning, tried to be like, oh, this is all fine, and we're, friendly occupiers. But little by little, things started to deteriorate.
All Parisians or just Jewish Parisians?
Just Jewish Parisians. But things started to deteriorate for everyone. Like food became much more scarce. Electricity was iffy at best. So things started to get dark quick. And this is a picture of a father fleeing with his daughters, and they've got everything they own behind them. And by 1941, everyone in Paris, not just Jews, knew someone who was arrested. And the first roundup of Jewish families was May 1941. I'm going to take a sip of water. So the second major roundup happened in broad daylight of Jewish families. And this is the Velodrome de Hiv. It was a stadium, and this happened July 17th, 1942. The French police assisted, to the horror of Parisians, with the roundup of 13,000 Jewish men, women, and children. And they were put in this stadium for 5 days with no food, or hardly any food or water. Bathrooms broke after the first day. It was horrific, and it was happening in broad daylight. And this, for the women, because it was primarily women in the city, or elderly men, because a lot of men were off at war. And so this, for the women of Paris, was, it couldn't be ignored. It was horrifying. It was happening in broad daylight, and it was happening with the assistance of their own government. So that bicycle stadium has since been destroyed, and the only thing is left is this plaque. And the wording is really interesting. Let's see if I can make sure I get this right. But so over 13,000 Jews were arrested and held here, deported and assassinated at Auschwitz. Over 4,000 children, over 2,900 women, and over 1,100 men. And they, suffered under inhumane conditions. And this is the line that's interesting. It says, by order of, and they were assisted by the police of the government of Vichy. Because it's still a source of shame in France that their government, so it was kind of a way for the French to separate and say, this wasn't really our government, it was the Vichy government that assisted in these arrests. And by order of the Nazi occupants. So this is all that's left, and this is where it was. They destroyed the building because of that horrific event there. But this was kind of a point for Parisian women that they were just furious. And maybe some of them had been resisting in small ways, like moving signs around so the Germans could, but now a lot of them were just enraged because they were seeing this happening to their friends and neighbors, and they felt like the need to do something. And that's when the resistance movement really, a lot of more women started getting involved in Paris. So as this was happening in occupied France, the OSS in America and the SOE, the counterpart in the UK, were like, okay, so not only are we fighting from the outside, we have to fight from within. We have to figure out how to assist the French resistance in the fight against the Nazis. So a little bit about how the OSS came to be. It eventually became the CIA. It was, Roosevelt in 1941 saw what the British were doing with spies and intelligence and didn't have anything like that, any sort of framework for that in the US. And so he tapped Major General William Donovan, Wild Bill Donovan, he's a character in the book, to start up this new organization. And he had to build it up from scratch. And it was called the Coordinator of Intelligence Department, and then they changed it to the OSS in 1942, which is where the story begins. So this is William Donovan. He was a national figure. He was the most decorated military person in World War I, most decorated soldier in the country's history. He was good friends with Roosevelt from their Columbia Law School days. And I have told my editors that if there's ever a movie, I want George Clooney to play him. So it's just a little side. So he had to build this organization out of nothing. And so he was an Ivy League guy from the upper class, and he tapped into that network to build this up to 13,000 personnel over the course of the war, including 35% women. 7,500 men and women served abroad in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Not many of them as undercover agents. A lot of them, it was just offices gathering intelligence. And he only recruited those he could trust in his network. So the OSS earned the reputation of being kind of elitist, and it was called oh so social or oh so snobby, which was kind of earned to some degree. But, and this, I go into this in the book, he also recruited burglars and con men just out of prison. And one of them was called the Georgia Cracker. He was a real life historical character. He knew how to pick locks, and so they busted him out of prison to pick locks. And there's a story in the book that he's involved in where he breaks into the Vichy French embassy in D.C., and that's based on a true story. So the women of the OSS, Maggie Griggs was kind of in charge of recruitment for them, but it was really tough because, you had the wax and the waves and the military, and they promised travel and, sassy uniforms, and Maggie Griggs couldn't even tell, took out ads, but couldn't even tell these women what they would be doing. It was all so top secret. So it was tough to recruit women for the jobs. Donovan said this being the 40s, he wanted women who were a cross between a Smith grad, a Powers model, and that was a modeling agency at the time, and Katie Gibbs Secretarial School. Yeah, please. And then, so a small percentage of women served overseas, and an even smaller percentage served behind enemy lines. I don't even have a number still, because it still hasn't been disclosed. But I know that my guess from what I've read is maybe it was a few hundred. It wasn't that many. And 3,800 men went to OSS parachute school, and anyone who went to parachute school was going to be dropped into occupied territories. So only 38 women went to parachute school. So we know it was at least 38. I think it was a couple hundred or so. So the OSS and the SOE, how did they aid the French resistance? Like you would expect, with guns and money. And they also helped them, though, engage in acts of sabotage, bombing railway lines, things like that, and also stealing valuable German intelligence secrets, often by going undercover.
Was Hetty Lamar involved with them too?
With the OSS, I don't know if she was OSS actually. She might have been SOE. Yeah, because I didn't come across her in the OSS. Yeah. Yeah. So the Secret Stealers, the main character is kind of a composite of a lot of different women I read about. Anna Kavanaugh is a young widow because she lost her husband in the war already in her 20s. She's teaching French at a school in D.C. She, Ivy League educated, went to Radcliffe. Donovan is friends with her family, and she's offered a job at the OSS because of her family connection. And then when she realizes what they're doing and that she has the opportunity to go overseas, she is determined to get there. So Donovan eventually sends her for training here at Bewley. This was an SOE training facility, an actual facility. And it was basically a finishing school for spies. And they were trained in explosives and burglary and wireless radio operation, which was a big part of the way they communicated, and of course acts of sabotage as well. This is an example of some of the wireless sets. So at the beginning of the war, it was like a 42-pound suitcase, which was really hard to move secretly, and they had to move them more and more often because the German intelligence and technology was getting smarter in terms of picking them up. But by later in the war, they got it down to 12 pounds, they called it a biscuit box, a little bit smaller. Two of the other main characters are also composite. Actually, one of them is a composite, Tatiana. She's based on several SOE agents I read about. She's Jewish and Parisian, and she loses her father and brothers. And she was and I read about a few women like this. They were bakers. They worked for the family business, and they joined the OSS or the SOE, and they just took to the role. They were born for this role that they never would have had if the war hadn't happened. Nora Khan, on the other hand, is based on an SOE agent named Nora Khan, and directly based on her. And she was such an interesting character. She was descended from Indian royalty. She wrote children's books and was described as dreamy and ethereal, and was not a good fit at all but was determined to serve and help her country, and almost got fired during training multiple times, but in the end turned out to be extraordinarily brave and surprised everyone. This is a picture of her before the war. This is a picture of her during the war, and this is her picture. She went undercover as a nanny in Paris during the war as Madeline. And this was her building. And there's a few scenes that are based directly on Nora's history, but I changed some details so she's Nora in the story. Another character in the book is Josette, and she is based on this. I don't even want to say woman here because she looks like she's 15 years old. Like she was Jeanne Rousseau. Is still revered in France because she was just this extraordinary hero during the war, and she graduated at the top of her class at university, spoke like 6 languages. This is what she looked like when she graduated from college, and she was angry from the start and started actually just stealing secrets from the Germans without being connected to any sort of resistance network because she was so mad, and then she got involved with the resistance network and ended up stealing some of the biggest military intelligence secrets of the war. So when I read about her, I was like, I have to have a character based on her. And this was a quote from her when asked by, I think it was David Ignatius in the Washington Post, like, why did you do this when you were like this young girl? And she said, I just did it, that's all. It wasn't a choice. It was what you did. At the time, we all thought we were going to die. I don't even understand the question, how could we not do it? So pretty extraordinary. This is her later in life. She did end up going to a concentration camp, Ravensbrück, I think it was, and she met her husband after the war. They were both recovering at the same hospital. There's this, her Josette and Anna in the book both end up working at the Hotel Majestic, which is part of one of the Nazi buildings that were taken over in Paris. And in the real history, Jeanne de Clarence Rousseau really did, like, she had a photographic memory, and these soldiers and these officers that she worked with thought she was just this little girl, like, oh, she's so cute, and they'd have a few drinks, and they'd start bragging to her. And like, you're not building that bomb. And they'd be like, here are the plans. See, we are doing that. And then she'd like run home and write it all down and pass it off to the British, which is just unbelievable. Another character in history who is in the book that I knew I had to include was Dr. Sumner Jackson. He was originally from Maine. He was the head of the American hospital in Paris. And his wife, he married a French woman named Touquette. And from the beginning, he was like, no, we're going to do whatever we can to resist. And so they would get POWs at the American hospital and in the course of their treatment, he would fake their death certificates and like get them out the back door through an underground network. So he helped save many, many, many soldiers. And unfortunately, he was arrested right at the end of the war and ended up in a concentration camp, but as did his wife and son. And his wife and son made it out, but he passed away. But he was extraordinary, brave man. He had a house on Avenue Foch, and I'll show you some pictures next. And Avenue Foch is this grand boulevard in Paris with beautiful homes, mansions. And so all the Nazis took over all these houses, of course, because they're going to take the best houses in the city. And he stayed in his house at 11 Avenue Foch and he allowed the French resistance and the SOE and the OSS to use it as a safe house and as a drop house for intelligence right under the noses of the Germans. So this is Avenue Foch, and it was called Avenue Boche. Boche was a derogatory name for the Germans at the time. And so 84 Avenue Foch, which is this house, was the headquarters of the Gestapo, and right near Dr. Sumner Jackson's home. And on the top floor, they had a prison where they tortured French resistance members and spies that they caught. And there's a scene in the novel based directly on one of the times that some of the prisoners at the top floor tried to escape by like rappelling down the building, and it's just unbelievable. This is the Passy Bridge and Metro Station, which also figures prominently in the book. It's a really beautiful bridge architecturally, and so we walked all along this when we were there. And one thing that was really fascinating, this is just an aside, a lot of couples, newly married couples from China and Japan, will fly their whole wedding party over and the photographer and makeup people, and they will have like wedding photos on the bridge with Eiffel Tower in the background. I was like, we must have walked by 5 like entourages of people who were taking pictures. It was crazy. So pivotal scene in the book. Oh, it's also been in a lot of movies, including, this is a picture from the movie Inception. This is the staircase, so the bridge is down below, and then this staircase goes up to the metro station up above, and this staircase is on the cover of the book. Which brings me to, people like to talk about covers or see like cover concepts and stuff, so I'm lucky, like my editors are really, I don't get the final say, but they give me some say. Like, with the title this time, they're like, no, Jane, this is what it is, and you don't, it's going to be The Secret Stealers. But so they gave me 3 cover concepts, and so the first one, I'm like, bombs are dropping, and she's like leisurely biking and like smiling, and also like she's a spy, and you can see her face. And then this one looked like Regency romance, like having her tea. And so as soon as I saw this one, I'm like, oh, this is the cover. Except I'm like, can you not make her look like Night of the Walking Dead? Like, can we just like make it look a little bit more like it's a woman? So, so then these were the 3 final iterations, and I went with the darkest one because I felt like that set the mood and the tone of the book. So yeah, I mean, all 3 of my books, I think one of the themes running through them is about women who did extraordinary things in history, who made extraordinary choices that a lot of women didn't make. And also one of the themes I think is later, they changed their minds about what was possible for their lives, and they changed their lives as a result of it. And so I also have a newsletter. Oh, thank you. If you sign up for the newsletter, I have a nice pretty sheet that I forgot at home. So thank you for signing up on the white sheet. I promise you I won't spam. I have a lot of fun online events coming up, as well as, I have a new book coming out in the next spring, hopefully. So I'll be sending notes about events around that as well. And yeah, I also do book clubs in person and virtual. So thank you so much for listening. And I'd love to take any questions if you have any.
Did you take the photograph of the steps
On
the cover?
On the cover. Not that particular one, but the one in the presentation my husband took. He's better at photography than I am. So
How long were you in Paris for?
we were there in October 2019 for about 8 days. Yeah, I know. And then it was dreamy. We haven't been back since. Maybe sometime.
Had you pretty much finished the book at that time, or are you just starting?
I had just started it. I had about 30 pages. Yeah, so it was very beginning. Yeah.
How long does it take you to write a book?
So that one was about, so the way my contracts work, the way my deal works with my publisher is I have to kind of present a proof of concept, like a synopsis and the first 3 chapters. So like the first 30 pages. And then if they like that, and that takes a lot of research just up front to do that. If they like that, then we agree on a deadline for when I need to send them, not a final manuscript, but a manuscript. So this one was about 7 months. From that proposal, they said yes, and then I wrote the draft in about 7 months.
But that was because you already had 2 others. How about your very first one?
Oh, that took 10 years. Yeah, that took a good decade. And I mean, I was my girls are 18 and 15 now. I was writing it in the fringes of my life. I made every mistake you can make. I got 70 rejections the first time out. It took a long time. But yeah.
How do you first approach a publisher and say, I've never written a book here?
Well, I ended up getting my agent after the book deal, but generally, you pitch agents, literary agents, you have to send them a letter, pitch the story, you have to have the whole book done. For your first book, you have to have the whole book done. And then if the agent likes it, then they'll sign you, and then they help you clean it up if it needs to be, and then they submit it to publishers. And it's a pretty brutal process.
So does the agent have the editors? Or who actually edits? when you?
Oh, so in my, some agents are very involved in the editorial process. Mine is not, because I've been working with the same editor since the first book, Faith and Alicia. We've been working together now for all 3 books, so we have a pretty good, so my agent's like, you guys have a good thing going. But a lot of agents get very involved in the editorial process. It's all kind of depends. Yeah.
So you said that the first one was also connected to World War II, or?
The Beantown Girls is a World War II story, also based on true stories of the Red Cross Clubmobile girls, which were basically they were sent overseas, and it was interesting. On the surface, they served coffee and donuts. They were supposed to play music, and then when you read about, they literally went to the front lines of the war with like a Jeep escort, and then you read about what they endured and the things they did to help these guys, and it was just unbelievable.
So how did you tap into that? Like, how did you find out about it? You're into history, or
Yeah.
what was sort of your creative
For the Beantown Girls?
Well, for any of them, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's like, well, I always say, you kind of, you have to have a gut feeling of like, okay, I love this. I'm kind of fascinated. So if I love it and I'm fascinated, hopefully other people will be too and want to read about it, and it's hard, like with the Secret Stealers. Actually, my 4th book is coming out this year, and last summer, I was like all over the place, and I went down a couple rabbit holes and researched like you do, and my husband would be like, you're not feeling it. Like, I can tell you, like, you're not into this, and it's early days. Like, you're going to have to live with it for a long time. So it's hard. Like, you just got to find something that you're really passionate about, that hopefully no one else has really written too much about too, something a little fresh, even though there's a lot of World War II, but like just kind of a fresh angle on World War II, so.
Is your next book based on World War II also?
Yes, and I didn't plan on it. I will explain how that happened.
There's a World War II theme.
Yeah, I know, and I did not plan on it, but, and I was trying to, I was thinking Cold War. Again, I was going all over the place, but when I was researching the Secret Stealers, I came across this woman. Her name was Drew Layton. She was a 1930s Hollywood movie star, kind of like a B-list movie star, and she starred in the Charlie Chan movies, which in hindsight are super racist today, but they were really popular movies then. She was kind of like the blonde sidekick in those movies, and she left it all behind and married the love of her life and moved to Paris, and he left the war and died, and so her story was so bananas, and I ran across it in multiple sources, and I was like, someone's definitely written a story about this woman, and it turns out no one had, and so she ended up being kind of the first voice of America, talking, reporting from Paris to American audiences on the radio, and then she got arrested. The Germans, they, under the pretense of they're arresting all the German women in America. They arrested as many American women in France as they could, and they housed them in a zoo outside Paris. And then from the zoo, they shipped them to the mountains to another internment camp, which was not all of them were horrible, but it was kind of like their propaganda camp, so they didn't treat them quite as horribly as some of the other camps because the Red Cross was monitoring it. So she faked stage 4 cancer to get out of that camp, and then she ended up being part of the underground network to get downed pilots out of France to safety. So I was like, this woman is crazy. I can't believe I've never heard of her before. And so I pitched it to my editor, and she's like, yeah, I think that's your next book. So, yeah.
But how do you write a whole, how do you flesh it out? You get your idea,
Yeah.
and then you create a story around
Yeah.
this.
And it's I was talking to my writer, I have a writer friend, we had coffee this morning, and it's my first draft, it's honestly, it's like blood from a stone. It's really hard. It's so hard, and then it gets easier. I love the revision process, I love the editing process, but the first draft for me, I outline. I'm a really maniacal outliner, and I'm really pay attention to structure, whether it's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and I also do a ton of research to kind of form a baseline, to figure out how to get my way into the story. But it's it's really I thought by the fourth one it would get easier, and it's like no, it's like if anything it's even harder because my expectations for myself are harder.
And then do you create characters in order to fill a void or fill?
Yeah.
in?
I do, and this one was challenging with Drew Layton because a lot of the characters, including her, are based on are real from history. Whereas, like the Secret Stealers, Anna was a composite, so that gives you a little more flexibility than if it's biographical fiction. Although Julia Child is one of her friends in Secret Stealers, that's not really giving away much of a spoiler. You figure out pretty early on. She was Julia McWilliams, and she served in the OSS in DC and then in China. So yeah, I outline a lot, and I plan and I plot like every chapter, every scene, every event, and every scene. And there's no like one right way to do it. That just seems to be working for me, and I'm sticking with it. So.
You're very linear.
Yeah.
In your thinking.
Yeah.
You go from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, I have friends. Well, Dick Healey and I were my bookseller, were just talking about Hank Phillippe Ryan is a friend, and she's amazing, and she cranks them out, and she like sits at her desk every morning and is just like la la la, I'm gonna write, and like no plan. Like I don't know how she does it, but yeah, it's like there's no right way.
Do you write? Do you type or do you
Yeah.
type?
Yeah, I was in high tech before my girls, and so yeah, I mean if you see the newsletter sign up, my handwriting is atrocious. So I type. Yeah, I use a program actually, if you're like interested in writing, called Scrivener, and it helps. You can organize like the manuscript chapters and all your research in one place, and that's been really.
What's it called?
Scrivener. Yeah,
SCRIVE?
SCRIVENER. Scrivener.
There's a bookstore in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, so it's it's really inexpensive software because you buy it for like $40 once, and they send you updates, and you never pay for it again. Which, like, my husband's still in tech, and he's like, "This is like the worst model in the world," but it's good for me. Yeah. So yeah.
I went to another author talk, and she was an accountant by trade and decided to write. So she does all her books on Excel.
I was going to say Excel. Oh my God, that would make my head explode.
But that's what she knows.
Yeah.
Familiar with it.
Yeah. Whatever keeps you comfortable. Yeah.
We had a teacher here in Hanson many years ago who worked in Washington during the war, doing something secret.
Mm.
And I always wondered what it was, so maybe you can look her up and put it
Oh
out.
yeah. That's right. Right. Oh, that's so
We
funny.
live in Halifax.
Yeah.
Does anyone remember B. Binns?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I know her name.
Yes.
I didn't know that about her.
Yes.
There's probably a treasure trove of character, stories in World War II with women doing things that nobody absolutely has a clue about.
And that's really true. Like, it was really interesting with the Beantown Girls. The Clubmobile Girls, I was so interested. Like, the more I learned about them, the more I was interested, and I couldn't believe no one had written a book about them. And I went back, I used the Schlesinger Library at Harvard, which is like a women's history research library. For this, and they had some archive materials about the Saturday Evening Girls Club from the North End of Boston, and their pottery now is very collectible. So I used them for that, and then I called them up for the Beantown Girls, and I had very low expectations, but I'm like, do you have anything about the Red Cross Clubmobile Girls? And somewhere along the way, there must have been a Clubmobile girl who went to Radcliffe, or there's some sort of connection, because they had 13 boxes of like letters and diaries and pictures and all this amazing stuff. So yeah, there's so much out there, and I think we're at a good time now where people are finally telling more women's history stories, from the war and elsewhere.
So was Julia Child an actual spy?
She was not a spy. Like, that is a rumor, but she was more of an administrator. She worked in the offices in DC and then in Sri Lanka and China, and that's where she met her husband. And then they moved to Paris when I think he was working for the State Department by that point. Yeah. Any other questions?
Are you local? Julie?
I live in Melrose, so pretty
okay.
local. Yeah.
Now, when you write a book, do you have to do a book tour? Is this part of that?
Well, it's been a weird, like, I was talking to Dick on the car ride down, and I mean, this came out April last year, and it was like a weird time for a book to come out. It was a tough, I mean, not as tough as the year before, but yeah, I mean, I have a publicist for each book, and she lines up a bunch of stuff, and, you know, my publishing house doesn't really do it. Like, I'm not, if I was Ellen Hildebrand, maybe they'd send me on a book tour, but yeah. No, they don't, they don't spend the money on that stuff, generally.
Do you have to go on a book tour?
No, but I love it. It's nice to be back in front of people again and connect with people this way. So I really enjoy it. So, and like I said, it's always, I mean, it's nice when anyone wants to hear about your book. So, you know.
Do you write every day?
No, no, I don't. And in fact, my friend this morning was like, "What are you working on now?" Because I have edits due a week from tomorrow for the 4th book, and I'm like, I got to refill the well. Like, I'm totally burnt out. Like, I need a few months to just work on the editing this one, getting ready for launch, and that's because the editing process after like the first round of edits, it's the copy edit and historical fact checking, which is tedious, and then proofread, which is like all the grammar. It goes through a lot, and then final read through on like the file that's going to the printer. It's a lot. So yeah, I don't write every day.
So when you present it to, let's say your first book, you said you have to send them a letter. You send the book as well?
You send the letter to the agent, and then and actually on my website janehealey.com I have a blog post about like resources for writers about agents and editors and all that kind of stuff. You send a letter to an agent, and if they like the pitch, like you pitch them, it's called a query letter. If they like the query, then they might ask for a sample, or they might ask for the whole book. So you have to have the whole book like solid. Yeah.
Is there a minimum of words?
For a novel, I think the sweet spot, and actually I knew that when I pitched Saturday Evening Girls Club, the sweet spot is 80,000 words for a first novel.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, it
translates to like how many?
like 250.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 250. Yeah, because they don't want to like invest too much in you. So like if it's 90,000, 100,000 words, that's more paper. It's more expensive. So yeah. So 80,000 is the yeah.
When you do all of your outlining as you're developing your chapters and so forth, do you do it from start to finish at the outset as to how you think you may progress, or does it just evolve like an onion as you're writing the story?
No, start to finish. But that's not to say I don't tweak things on the
Sure.
way if I don't feel like it's organic or coming together. But yeah, I almost to the point that like my outline's almost like a super messy first draft. It's like so I have it kind of all. I like to have a roadmap. Yeah. Especially with all the research. Like, it's, like, hard to keep it all.
I would caught in the weeds.
Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah.
So is tech just your day job, and this is what you always wanted to do?
Yeah, always. Yeah. I was a product, but, yeah, I mean, I was a product manager in tech, and but when my girls were born, my husband was in tech, too, and we both worked insane hours. He still kind of does. And I was like, I need to do something different. I need to do something that is more family friendly. And so that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to start writing. And I started freelance writing. So I wrote for like magazines, and I did private client work, writing like technology papers. And I did a lot of that. And that was kind of like, you know, my kids are born, like, when are you going to do this fiction thing you think you're going to do someday? Like, so that's when I started like taking workshops, and I have a little writers group. We're still all friends from my Boston Magazine days. There's 4 of us, and we started sharing pictures, sharing pages, and that's when I started to be like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I got to, you know, take it seriously. Yeah.
How long does it take you to do all the research for your books?
You know, like just to get the proposal takes a good 4 to 6 months, you know, just to get like that baseline of research. That's why, like, when I write the draft, I already have a pretty solid base of research, you know, to start with, you know, which is good. Yeah.
So how many words are in your first book?
Oh, so literally?
Little words aren't just-
Yeah. So this one,
In school, you were around.
yeah.
Spaced or double.
Right. So that one is around 83,000 words, the first one. And then the Secret Stealers is like 130,000 words. Yeah.
It's interesting to me that your first book was so different
Yeah.
than the other two.
Yeah.
I read the first two. I haven't read Secret Stealers, but
Yeah.
it's so different.
Very, very different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think because it was like by the time I finished after 10 years, it was like a Frankenstein project, and I still love that book, and it's like a special place in my heart. But it's like, and when I got the opportunity to write another book, it's like, okay, what's the kind of book you've always wanted to write? You know what I mean? Like it was, so that's why.
And you don't get stuck on World War II because sometimes I can't even read it anymore. It's so upsetting to me.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I mean, for concentration camp books, I find I have a really hard time reading those books. It's just too much, too horrific. Yeah.
I still have nightmares from Sarah's Key.
Oh yeah. That was a dark one. Yeah.
Well, French didn't recognize the Vendôme encampment, if you want to call it that, until the 90s.
Oh yeah. There was a huge source of shame about that, and there still is. Like, my husband lived in Paris, and we're friends with his old roommate there and his wife, and like even we went out to dinner with them, and you can just feel it. Like it's still a sense of shame that this happened in their own country, and some of their police, some of the the government was just unbelievable.
What did you say your first book's about?
So that was based. So I wrote an article for Boston Magazine about Saturday Evening Girl Club pottery years ago, and because it's so collectible now, it was like an antiquing column thing I was writing, and so that's about it was also called Paul Revere Pottery. They had the shop was called the Paul Revere Pottery Shop because it was like right across from the Old North Church. Yeah.
It was Selmore because it was Paul Revere.
Yeah, right. And I had the little stamp on the back. Yeah, so I was really intrigued about these Jewish and Italian girls who started this book club basically, and then it turned into this business. And I loved how like Jewish and Italian family like they became friends because they were first generation English speaking, and they lived in the North End, and there was a lot more Jewish people in the North End than I realized, and so that was my first. Yeah, that was my first kind of kernel for an idea, and that's what ended up being it. Yeah. It's more of a cozy book. Like, thank you. Yeah.
I liked Beantown Girls too. For
Thank
different
you.
reasons, but that I just like the storyline.
Thank you. And also, like, I always say
scary.
It's not scary. It's a love, it is. It's like a love letter to Boston,
Right.
like if you're Boston people, yeah. A lot of Italian grandmothers love that book. Like I hear a lot of North Enders,
See a lot of puppies.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I did the Jewish Book Council tour, so yeah.
And you get hungry during it.
Yeah, good food. Yeah. I should have put recipes in. Yeah. Any other questions? I should also mention my marketing husband would be like, did you tell them? So I do, it's called Historical Happy Hour. It's a podcast / webinar, and I do them live once a month, usually on a Thursday or Wednesday, and I interview other historical fiction authors. Some of them I'm friends, some of them, and they all have new books coming out. So my next one is with Heather Webb. She just wrote The Next Ship Home, which is an immigrant story about, and that's on Wednesday. You can sign up on my website at 7 live, but then the recordings go on YouTube and they go in podcast form. You can look them up. So I've done like Mark Sullivan and Pam Janoff and Lauren Willig, like some really amazing historical fiction authors. And you'll get invitations if you sign up for my newsletter for that as well. So thank you for listening and coming out, and Dick, thank you. And yes.
How many women in this room, seeing that I'm the only guy, be honest, I'm the best looking guy in the room. How many women in this room would have joined the OSS?
The OSS?
That is
I don't think I would have been brave enough.
I don't know. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it would be amazing. Yeah, I don't know if I'd be brave enough.
We
But
lived in
yeah.
Virginia,
Yeah, you
just
would be a
outside of
good
DC
spy,
for
yeah.
16 years.
Oh, okay. So
Our neighbor behind us,
Okay, I'll give it up.
moved, he was, gone he worked for the State Department.
yeah.
He was gone, okay, fine, whatever, finally moved back. He was retiring, and then his wife said, I can tell you now, he's a spy.
Amazing. I know. I know.
I was like blown away.
Yeah, yeah. It's so amazing.
Like where we were literally just outside of DC.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That is just,
Yeah, yeah. Sisterhood of Spies by Betty McIntosh. If you're into that history of the OSS, and she interviewed like as many of retired OSS as she could find, and so there's all sorts of like little nuggets of stuff about them. That was good. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
My alter ego.
Oh, and Dick Healey is my bookseller, Healey Booksellers. He's selling books tonight too. So, thank you.
Okay.